A modern civil service.
Modern civil service.
A modern civil service.
To me, a modern civil service is one that's ready to lead the UK through the next big challenges.
People that reflect the society that we serve, designing services built around the customer to deliver the outcomes they need.
Skilled,
innovative, ambitious.
A modern civil service.
Hello everybody and welcome to A Modern Civil Service, the podcast. Today I'm really excited to be joined by Nick Smallwood, the Chief Exec of the Infrastructure and Projects Authority, and we'll find out lots more about that over the course of the podcast. My name's Sapana Agrawal and I'm the Director of Modernisation and Reform. So over to you, Nick. Can you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about what the IPA is and what it does?
Yes, of course. So I joined government 3 years ago as the Chief Executive of the IPA organisation. And really, we've got quite a small, focused team of approximately 200 people. And we're seen as the centre of excellence for project delivery in government. We have a small group that looks after the function, profession and standards, naturally looking after the project standard, our guidance, documentation and toolkits. They also administer the Project Academy, our assessment and accreditation schemes, and of course run the curricula on our flagship programmes such as the Major Projects Leadership Academy and the Project Leadership Programme. I've also got a team who do strategy, performance and assurance, and we provide assurance on what are called the Government Major Project Portfolio. So they're some of the most complex, difficult and challenging projects in government, approximately 260 projects on that list right now. And we do the assurance to give advice to Treasury and to senior leaders in the civil service on whether the projects are ready to proceed and move forward to the next gate. In addition, the team also administer that portfolio, and we administer the Major Project Review Group, chaired by Alex Chisholm and Kat Little, at which we consider the outcome of the various project assurance reviews that are done in the IPA. Not only that, we've got a team of people who have expertise in project delivery. We've got a whole team of project delivery advisors and a group of expert advisors, people who've been maybe late career, lots of deep expertise in particular sectors, and we bring those teams together to give advice to the most difficult and challenged projects and try and help them get to a better place. And then we've got another team which is specialising in project finance, and they provide advice to Treasury on various funding models, how we might set up some of the more complex programmes and projects, how you might approach governance. And then they also are managing the offboarding programme for the private finance initiative contracts. There's a whole plethora of contracts that were taken out many years ago, both in government central departments as well as in local authorities. And we're looking to give best practice guidance on how we transition those contracts back into public ownership.
Brilliant, thank you. So in the Declaration on Government Reform, one of the actions was around moving all the eligible major projects into the government major projects portfolio. Can you tell us a bit about that and what impact it's had, please?
Sure. We made the observation that departments seemed to make a decision about what came on the GMPP. And actually, there was very clear criteria written by Treasury back in 2015, and we simply weren't applying it. And so we've reinstituted the rigour of what constitutes a government major project portfolio candidate, and it is a project that is novel, contentious, challenging, commits the government to long-term expense, it's above the delegated authority of a department, or it requires primary legislation. And by applying those lenses, we actually ended up doubling the number of projects on the GMPP, and what that means is they get far more scrutiny before they get funded. And I think that's appropriate. It's public money. So if they're very, very challenging and difficult, we actually want the opportunity to check and balance, are we ready to proceed? Are we in good shape? Does anything else need to be put in place to more confidently support successful outcomes? And so it's really having that additional lens and additional rigour. And I think we're starting to see the benefit of that now as we've tightened our focus on assurance, because we've also moved from a 5 rag rating to red, amber and green assessment at assurance gates, and it's much simpler and easier to make a decision about whether something's in good shape and can continue, whether with some specific advice it will be in good shape to continue, or quite frankly all the evidence that you see is just not going to support the cost, schedule and benefits, and they really need the project team to think again. And by bringing that rigour, we've been able to really challenge project teams to get better prepared for delivery. We've instituted a system where if we give a project a red rating, we have a follow-up review within 12 weeks. 89% of all projects that have had a red rating have been able to move to amber within 12 weeks, which I think is fantastic, and it's actually the whole intent behind having that rigour on the whole of the GMPP programme.
Brilliant, thank you. The government major projects portfolio is expected to deliver 700 billion of benefit. Sounds like a lot of money, very well worthwhile doing. Could you give us a flavour of some of the projects that are on there and some of the projects that might bring in a large chunk of those savings?
Yeah, let me give you a few examples, because I think we indeed do some exciting projects across the portfolio. Most recently, hopefully everyone enjoyed seeing some of the events on the Commonwealth Games. And actually, I think DCMS as a department did a fantastic job of taking the baton over from Durban when they bailed out of delivery, and Birmingham was chosen as the replacement city to host the Games. That left us with some real challenges to put the infrastructure in place for the athletic stadium and a brand new purpose-built aquatic centre, as well as thinking about how we might support the athletes attending the Games. And actually, the IPA contributed to that project by really supporting Dean Creamer and his team to deliver a fantastic outcome. But not without the challenges with interfaces with the local authority, interfaces with the local councils, and actually having to make some tough choices about what we did and didn't do in support of the Athletes' Village. The Games was delivered on time, just thankfully, within budget, and it's been a fantastic success. So how do you measure that success? Do you measure it for the event itself and everyone who was able to participate and the growth that it brought to Birmingham City? Or do you measure it with the legacy that the actual facilities will provide for the local communities? And I know, having visited the stadium and the aquatic centre, the local councils have got fantastic ideas on how they're going to actually really embrace what they've inherited for the benefit of the local communities. I think that's really where we see a great legacy of a major capital project and programme. And that contrasts very heavily with something like HS2, where we're building, I think for the first time, a really solid backbone from north to south in the country. It's not about faster journey times to London, although that will be a result. It really means you're actually connecting cities and making those connections allow you to think again about business opportunities, about growth, how you might actually repurpose your business, relocate your business for better connectivity north and south in the country. So huge opportunity, and that's in addition to the employment that comes with such a major endeavour. So I personally visited again 2 additional areas of the project only last week. 4,000 people on one site alone. There's 27,000 people at work on HS2, and we're not even at peak of construction. They have got the most amazing civil infrastructure programme, and if you saw the size of the tunnelling machine, 10-metre diameter cutting head, and they've got multiple tunnelling machines, 150 metres long each machine. It's like a factory going through the countryside, drilling the tunnels. So a fantastic feat of engineering that will be a legacy for the UK, and it's the first investment in rail infrastructure on that scale in many, many decades. And actually it's paved the way for the future Northern Powerhouse Rail, what we'll be doing with the Trans-Pennine route upgrade and other linkages east-west in the north. So that's an exciting project in itself and of scale. And then you contrast that with improving the national health and delivering 40 new hospitals and building hospitals that really represent what we need in terms of patient care for the next 50 years rather than just repeating what we've done in the last 50 years. So repurposing the clinical delivery and thinking how we might do that. And at the same time thinking about how can we do that for a lower cost per square metre. So there's lots of innovation going into the hospitals programme to look at design one, build many, a kit of parts, thinking about how you might have off-site fabrication and reduce the footprint. And in many cases we're having to expand existing hospitals, so you've got to be mindful of not interrupting the clinical services delivery at that hospital whilst you build the expansion. So lots of complexity working around live assets. And then contrast that with the new prison building programme, where there's actually some systemic thought gone into why are we building a prison? Are we building a prison to lock people up, or are we building a prison that will actually help with reducing reoffending And I'm pleased to say that, in 5 Wells and the work that's gone into that programme, fantastic thought about what is it that we need to build to deliver better outcomes for reoffending. And that's gone into the hospital building programme, the facilities at that location, to actually train prisoners, give them a real step up when they leave prison and reintegrate into society. That contrasts very heavily with what you see in the old Victorian prisons that we haven't really replaced in the last 100 years. And then we've got a whole raft of projects and programmes in the transformation space, everything from delivering universal credit and reform to the benefit system and having one overarching system that integrates all the old complexity of benefits. And then since we've left the European Union, we've got challenges of the future farming programme, where we've got to actually replace what existed in the European agricultural policy. So whole breadth of projects in the GMPP that it's really exciting.
Brilliant, thank you. So obviously delivering on time to budget is really important, but it sounds like each project is trying to think through a much broader set of objectives. So you mentioned with the Commonwealth Games, thinking about the legacy of the Games. Could you tell us a bit about how you deliver projects and why that's becoming more and more innovative and important?
Absolutely. So we recently published a document called Transforming Infrastructure Performance, a Roadmap to 2030, which was trying to paint the picture that certainly in the built environment, you really have to put the citizen at the centre of everything you do. At the end of the day, we're building a railway in order to deliver some benefit, and it's to the citizen. And at the same time as building something, you've got to be cognizant of the natural environment in which you're building. We've clearly got some ambitions for the country on net zero, and that increasingly creates a challenge of what's the embedded carbon in what you build, but also how much carbon do you consume in building it. And people are really serious and interested in that space. So we have to recognise we can't just do what we've always done. We've got to have an eye on the carbon footprint that we introduce. And biodiversity is important. So there's a really genuine interest in what's the impact we're going to have on the biodiversity. Are we having an offset to potential impact we cause? Are we planting enough trees, not just for net zero, but to actually replace critical parts of the environment? And I see increasingly you start to then branch out into the other United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And there's some really great practice starting to appear on projects like Thames Tideway, where they took a real interest in the number of ex-offenders they would employ on the project. They took an interest in the unemployment levels along the route of the project, and could they actually influence that employment picture? They had a particular interest in levelling up the gender diversity of engineers on the project. So you can do many, many things on the back of what are massive projects, and it's not an additional cost. It's actually part of the licence to deliver, but actually it benefits the project. You actually get much better buy-in from the local community if you actually partner with them. And the legacy that you leave is equally important. And Thames Tideway did a fabulous piece of work to look at the legacy they would leave on all the shafts that they had for the tunnelling operations. And they engaged with the communities to understand what did the community want as a legacy when they were finished. And they were pleasantly surprised that they didn't necessarily want what the project had planned. And it wasn't necessarily more expensive what they wanted. So it's been a win-win to think through delivering to the communities at the end of the project what they would genuinely want to see. And I think increasingly society expects us to be mindful of the impact we have whilst we deliver and the legacy that we leave at the end. And I think that's incumbent on the project teams to embrace. And it's a challenging world actually to do that in now, but it's the reality. And then the other dimension of complexity that we've got to embrace, Sapna, and is really only now I think coming to the fore, is the fact that the digital world is upon us and we have to embrace it. And we've probably been slowest in public sector projects to really think through what's possible. And just fast forward 10 years from now, what role will robotics play? What will AI be doing for us? Have we got sufficient automation? Have we got opportunities for automated software to design our projects? The reality is a lot of the technical solutions already exist, they're mature, we're just not always using them. So I think we've got some catch up to do on public sector projects to really embrace the technology, require the technology to be deployed and become an intelligent client. So I always talk about the government. At the end of the day, if we don't ask in our contracts, you're probably not going to get what you want. So you've got to be much clearer in requiring our delivery partners to provide a 3D model at the end of a project, to actually demonstrate how they're using automation and digital technologies to lower the cost, because at the end of the day it's public money, and if we can do the same for a lot less, that's only to be a real advantage and adds to the benefits. And I'm a passionate believer that there's a step change opportunity in performance here, that we can not only embrace what's a massive agenda, but really make a step change in productivity and performance, and therefore cost-effective delivery of the ambition in government. And it goes beyond infrastructure. You know, the digitalisation piece goes into our transformation programmes, our IT programmes. And I saw a fabulous example of AI being used by DEFRA recently, where they've used it to help with the rejuvenation and management of peatlands, where they can better manage the water course flow through a peatland and get that right, so that you then have a peatland as a net carbon absorber rather than a carbon emitter.
Amazing, thank you. And then you mentioned that we were perhaps slightly slower to embrace digital than you would have liked to see. Why was that? Was it sort of the experience of our delivery professionals? Was it a cultural thing? Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
It's a bit of a mixed bag. I think it would be wrong to say we're not doing anything. We've got green shoots now appearing and some fabulous examples of best practice appearing. But there's a challenge here that the supply chain in the UK private sector is very fragmented. So if you're building something and you've typically got a tier 3 contractor who is doing the installation work, unless you were very clear with the tier 1 contractor on what you expected to be automated and done, you can't expect the tier 3 to do it. So it really comes all the way back to the client being clear on our requirements. And I don't think we were that knowledgeable about what was possible. And I just find it quite interesting that when I was in the private sector working in the oil and gas world, we were always challenged to embrace the learnings from the automotive and aeronautical industry. And when we looked at those industries, we realised that we're really driving digitalisation and automation to really a very high level. And you'll see that the oil and gas world has now moved on. And I think it's a challenge for us to now look in the public sector and say, what can we learn from the oil and gas industry to bring into our projects? Because at the end of the day, there aren't many differences in terms of the activities that need to be done. Yes, the planning is quite challenging, but the actual design and build of our assets is pretty much standard stuff. And I think there's a huge opportunity to make a big step change. It does require the supply chain to change, though. So another of the blockers is if you contract on a time and materials basis, and we have a huge game-changing opportunity to take hours out of a project, the contract community is going to look at lower revenues. And so what do we do to actually allow them to make a larger profit and become a profitable long-term partner with us, but at the same time have an expectation they are going to see lower revenues? And we haven't quite cracked that. We've done a lot of work with the supply chain to develop what's called the construction playbook and really justify that we can work differently. We need different models. I think we're at the tipping point now where we want to see the contracts going into our projects that actually meet the intent behind the construction playbook and deliver all those changes.
You've talked about sort of knowledge, skills, and you're also talking about the volume of delivery experts that are needed for these projects, up to 27,000. Could you tell us a little bit about what the Government Projects Academy is trying to achieve on skilling, and also a little bit about do we have enough delivery professionals in government in the UK, and if not, what are we doing to try and build that up? Sure.
So I think it's absolutely essential if we're going to be successful that we have competent, capable people to deliver on projects. We've got some world-class schemes like the Major Projects Leadership Academy and the Project Leadership Programme, but they were typically late career schemes and they don't assure competence. You know, graduating from a scheme, I would liken it to you leave university with a degree. It doesn't mean to say that you're competent to do something. It means that you've got the core skills, but you've then got to demonstrate competency. So the Project Leadership Academy is all about doing an assessment and accreditation at various levels of competence so that we know people have the skills and the ability to apply them. So master practitioner level, we would expect people to have attended the MPLA or equivalent and have demonstrated the skills to deliver a major project or program. And then we know they're competent. And we've got 4 levels because I think it's really important that we actually hone and build those skills from early career right through, so that we don't end up with late career people trying to catch up on what best practice in project delivery is. We've got a whole cadre of people in government who've got core skills right the way through their career. Have we got enough of them in government? No, I don't think we have. We've got a lot of people who basically have got basic knowledge, and we need to raise their capability. And the great thing about project delivery is you can come from the policy profession and pick up those skills in your career. You can come from many, many backgrounds. I'm a chartered mechanical engineer, but I've seen many people come from, civil, electrical, instrument, or actually not even technical areas.
There'll be people listening to this podcast who are not delivery professionals, so that they might be in Opdal, they might be in the policy profession, and they're sitting here thinking, gosh, working on HS2 or the Commonwealth Games, that sounds pretty cool. Where could they go to find out more information, and what sort of instincts, interests do you think you have to be a project delivery professional?
Well, being a project delivery professional, a project manager, project director is all about being an integrator of teams. It's about bringing the right skills and people together in the appropriate way to deliver an outcome. So I think the background that you come from is less important than have you got that ambition and that core ingredient of wanting to integrate and lead teams. And where do you go? We're about to launch the Project Delivery Hub, which will be a one-stop shop, basically administered by the IPA, where anyone in government can go to learn what are the ladders through the Project Academy, what guidance and tools have we got to help and advise project teams, and who are the focal points to go to for help. So that's going to be a real game changer as far as I'm concerned, in terms of making it very simple for people to go and look at who can help and what can they do to further their career. I'd also point out that at the end of the day, no projects are delivered without the policy people, the digital specialists, the government commercial people, Crown Commercial Services. Delivering some of these large complex projects is not just a group of project people. It is an integrated team across the whole of government. And that's really what makes it special, that we actually rely on all those people to deliver some of these complex programs and projects.
You mentioned sort of integrated teams and the importance of that. One of the challenges to government policy that external stakeholders have is that we don't always think about delivery enough when designing policy. So it sounds like a core intervention in that is having an integrated team. Could you tell us a little bit about that, and any tips that you have for policymakers about how to think through delivery?
You're so right, Sapana. One of the reasons that we fail on some of the projects and some of the well-intended policies is that nobody thinks through how you translate policy to delivery. I think it's a fundamental issue that we have to address early in a project. And right now we're writing a draft guide on how to do a project delivery strategy, followed by a more mature project delivery plan, because it doesn't exist today. People simply don't know. And yet, for the more experienced professionals in government, they do know they've got to translate it, and bits of it appear in the business case or in how they've approached the contract community. I've come from the world where it was a fundamental requirement to write it down and have it checked and balanced at an assurance gate review that you'd got it right. And you can't do it early enough, which is why I talked about project delivery strategy, because early you haven't got all the answers, so you've got to start thinking. And it's okay that that can change and mature into a detailed plan later. And that plan should think about who's going to do what owners team do you need, who is going to be the sponsor, how might you govern the project, how might you go to the supply chain, how much you're going to do in-house versus rely on the supply chain, what are the key risks, who are the key stakeholders. It sounds basic stuff, but actually we don't do that thinking until it's too late sometimes, and then you're almost committed to a certain project delivery vehicle or a certain contracting strategy because you don't have any choice. And I think we can do a much better job in that space, and it gets more complex the more esoteric the projects become. So when they're really policy to a program or a grant scheme, the scheme itself might sound absolutely brilliant, but unless you've got the people on the ground to deliver it, it simply won't happen.
Nick, a little birdie told me that you have lived on 4 continents, but you've managed projects across 5. What were your learnings about sort of how project delivery is done across the world. What's everybody got in common, and where are there really major cultural differences in how projects are run?
Wow, that's a really interesting and broad question to answer. The observation I'd make on projects delivered in the developed world, people are pretty arrogant about safety performance, a lot of risk taking, a lot of non-compliance, assumptions about quality, and actually you can almost replicate what you see in Australia with what you see in Canada, the US, or Europe. In the developed world, you've got both extremes of project delivery. You've got naivety and ignorance and lack of understanding and knowledge of what's required. And if you go to African nations where they haven't actually had lots of infrastructure build, lots of expertise and experience, they're willing learners. If you go across to mainland China, where resource is unconstrained, they can just deliver the most amazing projects in half the time that you could ever imagine. They are way ahead right now in terms of modern methods of construction. They can build skyscraper hotels in a matter of weeks, finished from start to finish. And seeing that whole breadth of landscape of modern methods to unconstrained thinking, nothing's too difficult. And then you have to superimpose other boundary conditions. So in the developed world, typically lots of planning constraints, lots of focus on budget and affordability and outcomes, less rigor, I think, in the developing nations. So that's probably a common feature. But I've been blessed in working living in 4 continents, of working with different cultures. And actually, when you understand a bit about different drivers in different cultures, they are quite different. And there's a fabulous book on managing cultural difference and power distance and how that plays a part in how people work and behave is really quite something. And I never forget, I got to the US and I inherited a bit of a train wreck project. And I had to reduce the size of the owners team from 320 down to 82 or so. And we had a big meeting with the 82 that were left after I decided who was going to stay and who needed to leave. And I said, I really value what you've done, we're going over here. And it was palpable that everyone breathed a sigh of relief. They were just looking for leadership and direction of where we were going. And all I did is point them to the promised outcomes that the project sponsors had required us to deliver. And it hadn't had that. They'd been sort of so loose, and that whole group didn't perform well in a loose, ungoverned environment. And the same in Southern Africa, where I think they really value direction and leadership, and they're not too open to a lot of debate and discussion. You go into Europe, everyone has a view, don't they? Everyone has a view, and you've got to actually recognise it. You've got to actually embrace the breadth of the project team, and yet at the same time keep them focused on the outcomes you want. And sometimes we get lost on either one or the other. We're busy having debate and we lost the plot on what we were trying to deliver, or we didn't articulate what was important and how we were going to drive it.
One of the things that we're focusing on in the Declaration of Reform is sort of broader skills across government, but also leadership skills. Talking about your varied experience, it sounds like you've had to adapt your leadership style depending on the teams, the cultures, and the needs of the project. So could you tell us a bit about your leadership style and how you adapt given what's needed?
You absolutely have to adapt to the environment and the circumstances, Sapana. You also have to change the style depending on what phase of the project you're in. If you're very dictatorial and very driven on schedule and you're only at SOBC, you're not going to succeed, are you? You've actually got to embrace broad thinking, understand what the optionality is, what we're trying to achieve, understand all the challenges, risks, and be quite wide in your scope and thinking. And then as you get more toward final investment decision, you start to narrow down what's possible and what's acceptable. And if you want to deliver better projects, you've got to be quite adept at managing how and when you sort of close the optionality down. And that includes shutting down scope changes and being quite disciplined on not embracing every great idea that comes over the table. And my style has always been to focus on outcomes. I think you have to have that at the top and centre of everything you do. And being transparent and open and having the right conversations at the right time, not only with the project team, but also with your sponsors, and understanding how you drive the whole of the organisation forward. And it does take drive. So as you move into an execute phase, really successful project teams have a leader who's focused and driving success, and will support them to get to the better outcome. And that can be quite challenging because there's always blockers and difficulty placed in your way. And what I've seen on successful projects, it's not one individual at the top, but the individual at the top is able to mobilise a really successful team of individuals who then deliver the project. And I saw that firsthand on a number of projects, one in Africa and the one that we finally delivered in the USA, where the project team would have died for each other at the end. You know, they were really committed to do the best possible job they could, and they deliver world-class outcomes. So it was absolutely consistent with the objectives of the sponsors. And you've got to be able to adapt not only your cultural environment, but your team environment and phase of project.
For listeners that are trying to develop their leadership skills, especially in the project delivery space, other than signing up for the Leadership Academy, do you have any tips of how to build these skills? How did you learn? Did you learn by shadowing people, reading books? What happened?
Absolutely. You need experience. You've got to, you know, I was blessed with being able to work on small projects, and then I managed portfolio projects. Leading people and managing people is quite important along the journey. So not one or two, but having a large team that you've got to do the annual appraisals, you've got to set objectives, you've got to deal with the day-to-day challenges that individuals have, because when you're leading a large project and program, it's about leading the people at the end of the day. So a lot of the skills that we're looking for in the Project Leadership Academy are centred very much on leadership rather than the detailed technical content of project management. That's a skill as well, though. So you need to actually be able to absorb, you know, what does good contingency management look like? How do you read a cost report on a project and know whether it's good or bad? And the best way to do that is experience. Get on a project team. Try and find a number of roles that will give you exposure to those parts of a project. There's nothing better than experience.
So the question we ask all of our guests is, what does a modern civil service mean to you?
What does a modern civil service mean to me? I think it means having integrated teams delivering world-class results for our citizens right first time, every time.
Brilliant, thank you. Nick, thank you so much for being on our podcast. The work that you and the IPA are doing is core to delivering on the government's declaration on reform. So we're really grateful for all your efforts and for you taking out the time to share your progress with us. So thank you, and thank you to everybody listening. For those of you listening, if you know someone that's living our vision of a modern civil service, has ideas to share, or can provide brilliant examples of being more skilled, innovative and ambitious, please do get in touch. We'd love to feature you on the podcast.